Hey, welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss notes series, where I give my thoughts and notes and etc. on DMing and D&D, and as we go through the Out of the Abyss adventure at my friendly local game store with my intrepid group of players. And Out of the Abyss is the 5th edition official Underdark adventure. So again, not again if you're a first-time viewer, but I always say this, if you're a first-time viewer, this is not an actual play. This is not a blow by blow of every little thing that happened. What it is instead is kind of a summary and an overview, a recap of what happens in each session, as well with notes on running of the adventure and, DMing in general, possible D&D rules clarifications, that sort of thing. So if you're a new viewer, hope you enjoy it. If you're a returning viewer, I appreciate your support very much. As I often say, this video series has some of the higher engagement of things that I do. So I'll jump right into viewer feedback. So let me put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback here, and let's see what we can see. It's pretty light on viewer feedback this time around. Did have a comment from Vasily Chrison, said, great recap. I love the Rocktopus. Who doesn't love the Rocktopus, really? Vasily, I mean, right? It's the Rocktopus. It's like the fawns of the D&D world. I think you've inspired me to bring it back for my players. I can only hope so, Vasily. I can only hope so. You can never have too much Rocktopus. So, anyway, so there's one comment. And then the other one I have is from Valendrave. Said, Shane, how does your limited teleport thing from Vizoran work? My group is approaching the first break, and it will be some time before I get back to it, but I would love to know for prep purposes how you worked this. So what Valendrave is talking about is I mentioned that Vizoran at the Tower of Vengeance, the sort of exiled drow who could have been the Archmage of Minzo Baranzan, if Gromf hadn't have politically maneuvered him and got him exiled. They've teamed up with him to basically take down the demon lords, and so they're running around collecting items to do a ritual for Vizoran. Now, Vizoran in my campaign, this is not in the book, this is not in the official Out of the Abyss book or anything like that, gave them basically a wand or a rod, if you will, of limited Underdark teleportation. I did this because the distances in the Underdark are vast. I mean, they're vast. And there's a lot of, unless you just montage everything or summarize everything, there is a lot of travel time in the Underdark. So, we're like 3/4 of the way through adventure. We've made the point. It takes a long time to get around the Underdark. So, I introduced this device, magic item, whatever, that Vizoran gave them to facilitate as they run around collecting these items, getting these items back to him. And the reason that it's a limited device of Underdark teleportation is because teleporting in the Underdark is difficult because of all the Fair's Rest, that energy. So it's hard to scry in a lot of areas of the Underdark, and it's also hard to teleport in a lot of areas of the Underdark. Now, Elven Tower, which is a website that has a guide for Out of the Abyss that I rely on a lot, they're just like, just give them a helmet of teleportation. Let's just do it. So I kind of, and then, I don't think the book, the official Out of the Abyss book, does much, if any at all, teleportation. Maybe it does. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't think it does. Like Elven Tower suggests, hey, in this one treasure hoard, or when Bruiner recruits them or whatever, just give them a helmet of teleportation. So I kind of compromised in the middle of that and came up with this limited teleportation ability that Vizoran has come up with. And what it is it's a wand or a rod, whatever, it's this big thick, stick, round cylinder, that it allows teleportation as a ritual. So you have to do a ritual, which takes 10 minutes. So it can't be instantaneous. I didn't want it. I didn't want the players using it as a let's escape from every fight we get into that's tougher than we want it to be device. I just wanted to allow a little bit of expedited movement. So it's a ritual, takes 10 minutes to cast. Vizeron taught the warlock, here's how you do it. But anybody, if they know the ritual, can do it. And it allows teleportation in this way. If you're outside the cavern that has Vizeron's Tower of Vengeance in it, then you can teleport back to that cavern, like a specific spot in that cavern. Not inside his tower, but in the cavern that his tower is in. If you're in the tower, or not the tower, but in that cavern, then you can teleport back to the last place you teleported to the cavern from, right? So it's very limited on how you can teleport with this thing. Anywhere you are, I guess even if you weren't in the Underdark, but definitely if you're in the Underdark, you can teleport back to that cavern. But the only place you can teleport out of the cavern back to is the last place that you teleported in from. So you can't just, the first time you have it, you can't just, when Vizeron hands it to your players or whatever, if you decide to use it, you can't just say, well, I'm going back to, Gauntlgrim, boom, and off I go. It doesn't work like that. In fact, you have to do the traditional travel somewhere and then teleport back to the cavern before you can even teleport out of the cavern back. And I would say if they even tried it, if they were in the cavern and said, I want to go to wherever, and they hadn't teleported back in from there and they were just trying it, then I would have either it fizzle or they would teleport, but then they would immediately teleport back to the same spot they tried to teleport from. So they would, blink out, blink back in. That's assuming that they hadn't already come back in. They just, Vizeron gives it to them and says, look, you can only come back into the cavern from somewhere else. You can't just pop out somewhere, or you can only go from the cavern to somewhere else that you've already come back from. If they don't believe him or want to test that, it won't work. But if they teleport from inside the cavern, and even though the last time they teleported in, for example, is from the Wormwrithings, and they're like, I want to go to Gauntlgrim, or I want to go to, Neverlight Grove or whatever, it'll take them immediately back to the last place they teleported back from, to the cavern. So I hope that's not too confusing. The point is, it's useful but limited. It's not meant to be a get out of jail free card. It's not meant to be, let's avoid all possible dangers and annoyance of the Underdark. Really, the whole point of it is Vizeron wants them to be able to get stuff back to him as soon as possible when they find the elements of this ritual. But in all honesty, I mean, it's the story reason, but it also makes sense. If he could just teleport them around and bring them back, he probably would, because it would facilitate and quicken what he wants to do. But it is very hard and very dangerous to teleport in the Underdark. So there you go. And there's really no official name for it. It's the wand of limited Underdark teleportation, if you want to call it something. We kind of jokingly call it the wand of limited, Vengeancy, Underdark teleportation, just as kind of a joke, because it's the Tower of Vengeance and all that stuff. But it doesn't really have a name. As far as how many people or creatures that can teleport at one time, I didn't really set that. I just kind of said it's really kind of the upper limits are really kind of like if the expedition that, began in Gauntlgrim at the beginning of part 2 were fully kitted out with as many NPCs as possible and everything by the book, and every possible NPC that could go went, and you got your lizards and then all your party members or whatever. That's kind of the upper limit. And because it's not meant to teleport entire armies around, right? Another thing I didn't do was give it charges, since it's so limited and back and forth, I didn't give it charges. But Vizeron did say, because the players asked, like, well, how often can we use this? And teleporting in the Underdark is sketchy, right? So I'm never going to have, unless some just weird situation comes up, I'm not going to have any of these teleports be dangerous or not work. But if the players really started abusing it or something like that, or found some loophole uh, to, really derail the tension and narrative of the campaign with this thing, then I'd probably find a way to say, well, it's conking out because, as Vizeron told you, this only use it when you need to. He was like, just use it when you need to, and without giving official charges or limited number of uses or something like that. So there you go. Valendrave, I hope that's helpful. And again, that's just something I came up with. Anybody, Valendrave or anybody else, this is not in the book. It's not something that you have to use. I just thought it was a nice thing to kind of move them around because I'm getting tired as the DM of just ongoing day after day after day of travel, and I don't want to montage everything and summarize everything because then that minimizes the danger of the Underdark. Even if you're saying, hey, your expedition is handling the light stuff. So I don't want to do constant travel, but I also don't want to completely get rid of all travel because you can have some fun with Underdark travel, and it keeps the tension and the narrative and the story that, this is dangerous. The Underdark on any given day is dangerous. So there you go. Hope that helps and that it's interesting for you, Valendrave, and anybody else who's curious. And feel free to use the Wand of Limited Vengeancy Underdark Teleportation as is. Feel free to change it, whatever, use it as or not as best seems fit for your campaign. So there you go. So that's actually it for user feedback for this video. So I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles of your feedback, and we will resume with what happened last session. So a couple things that I want to touch on that are relevant to last session, but that, aren't part of actually, like, well, and then this guy did this, and then this guy did this, and then she did that, is one, I as DM decided to modify one of our house rules. And this, basically last session was a huge purple worm fight. I mean, basically it was like over 2 hours of a purple worm fight, which actually kind of surprised me because I didn't expect my players to stand their ground and full on fight a purple worm. But players being players, of course, that's what happened. But at the end of last session, they were amscraying because they suspected a purple worm was coming. So, they're like, let's beat feet. Let's get out of here. Feet don't fail me now. I don't have to be the fastest. I was going to be faster than the slowest. They were out. They were trying to get out of there. In fact, if you'll remember, I had a big deal with one of my players because they were like, oh, well, I thought my miniature was here and I was trying to escape and I did the house, well, not the house rule, but I made the thing that you and you alone are responsible for where your miniature is on the map at any given time. Even if you normally let other people move it for you, you alone are responsible. But anyway, go watch the last video if you want to know more about that. Because, I mean, when this session started, the discussion started again, and the player, that's fine if the player wants to talk about it, but I'm done with it. I'm like, okay, this is the rule. And the reason I'm making that the rule is to avoid this ongoing, that's just the rule. Let's move on. Okay. So, anyway, they fought whatever. And they did, as I'll talk about, before this video is out, they did a lot better than I expected they would. It was still a tough fight. And a PC died, but didn't. And I'll get into that again before the video's out. But they did pretty well. And, it just keeps convincing me that this party for the campaign as written is OP, is overpowered. One, because it's always been a large size party. We've gone anywhere from 12 players. I think we got down to 6 or 7 for a short time. Now we're up to 8. And so it's 8 7th level players. And compared to the adventure as written for all of the encounters, they're OP. And they're OP because, like, there's just some magic items that they've gotten. They've got a couple of the legendary weapons from White Plume Mountain. One of the monks is running around with, Dawnbringer the Sun Sword, so it's basically a Jedi, or they're a Jedi or whatever. So there's just some stuff going on, and it's not there. They're not trying to power play or anything like that. It's just kind of organically developed before I really got a handle on balance. But anyway, because of all that, and not to be a stingy, grinchy DM, but to make sure that there is challenge and that in the adventure, because if there's not a true challenge, I feel that the investment and the reward of the game can be weaker than it should be. So I just want to make sure to maintain an appropriate risk versus reward and challenge in the game. So along that, I've modified one of my house rules, and what we've done for a long time is basically said, except in very rare circumstances, the cost of spell components is basically fungible. And what I mean by that, you don't have to keep track of every little spell component. You don't have to buy all your spell components. Just when you cast a spell, subtract the gold piece value of whatever the components would be. And that just makes things easier on everybody. But it does, it still costs to throw these spells. It comes out of your gold. So that's just, I thought that was a good way of doing it, because I don't want to do away completely with the idea of spell components, because, some of these spells are powerful and impact gameplay enough that there should be more than just it uses up a spell slot. There should be more of a cost to it. So here's my Waffle House cup. I don't know if you can see Waffle House. Okay, anyway, I've raved about Waffle House before. I almost went there tonight. I took my family somewhere else, but I thought about Waffle House. We went and saw Paddington 2, which was a very good movie, very clever, very well done. And if you don't think it's hard to go from Paddington 2 to getting into the headspace of the Underdark that's cursed by the Demon Lords, wow, madness. That's a hard headspace change to make, but I do it because I love you, dear viewer. Anyway, moving on. So what I've done is, and even at the time, way back when we established that house rule, I even said something like, stuff like resurrect or raise dead, I probably would say that doesn't count. So anyway, there was an instance of revivify that was cast, and it wasn't for the player I talked about who died but didn't. There was an NPC expedition member who died, and after the session, that somebody posted a Facebook message and said, actually, I think we would have cast revivify, because we ended right when the battle ended. So they were like, they were saying, hey, I think we should have cast revivify, or would cast revivify on that expedition member, one, to bring you back to life, and then two, also to strengthen our bonds with the expedition. And I said, man, that's fine. I said, make it happen. Just tell me who's casting the spell, and subtract the gold point value of gold piece value of that. I think it's 300 gold pieces worth of diamonds for revivify. And then I got to thinking that they basically did better against the purple worm than I expected. And, it's making the things challenging for them and finding that right balance is it's a bit of a challenge for me. It's not impossible, but I got to tinker with it constantly to make it more of a challenge for them compared to the encounters as written in the book, because they're double the party size that's expected. I think challenge rating and all that is usually based on, now this says characters levels 1 through 15. It used to say stuff like 4 characters of 1 to 15 or whatever, but now it just says 1 to 15, levels 1 to 15. But CR is based on a party of 4 characters. So if you have a CR 3 monster, then that means that a party of 4 third level characters should be able to defeat that monster and overcome that encounter without taking a death. That's the basic thing, right? So and they fought this purple worm that's a CR 15 encounter, CR 15 monster, and they're 7th level. So if they were a party of 4 7th level characters, it should have had at least one person die outright, maybe more, and possibly a TPK, right? because it's over double the character level for the party size. But you double that and you get 8 7th level characters, and it becomes a much less of a challenge. So with all that in mind, I said, okay, so here's what we're going to start doing. I said any spell that reverses death or prevents imminent death, we're going to make that so that's no longer fungible on the spell components, which means you subtract the gold point value and move on. I said moving forward, then you need those components, and I need you to tell me when you buy those components and who has those components and all of that in advance. And I'm doing that because if you can prevent or reverse death, again, that affects the challenge level and the nervous factor of the game. So I don't want to prevent them being able to do so. I just want to make sure that they plan ahead appropriately and invest and risk resources to prepare for those kind of situations. So, I think that's fair. And I did say, look, by preventing death, I'm not talking about throwing shield as a reaction or, throwing a healing spell if somebody's just got a few hit points left. That's not what I mean. I mean, either A, they're dead. By the rules, they're dead. Either they took enough damage that they, what is it, if you double or like if you have 50 hit points and you take enough damage to take you down to 0 and then another negative 51, whatever the rules is, either you're instantly dead or you failed your death saving throws when you hit 0 hit points and didn't stabilize or something. You died. By the rules, your character isn't at 0 hit points. You're not making death saving throws. You're dead. The character is DEAD, dead. So if it's a spell that would reverse that condition, raise dead, resurrect, revivify, there may be others, then you need the actual spell component ahead of time, whether you find it or buy it or whatever. To prevent death, I said I'm not talking about like, what is it, Spare the Dying, because I think Spare the Dying just automatically stabilizes you at 0 hit points. But being at 0 hit points doesn't mean that A, you are dead, or B, that you're absolutely going to die, because you've still got to make your death saving rolls. So if it's a spell like that, then you don't have to have the spell components ahead of time. But if you are imminently dead, if like you're dead, no matter, you are either dead or on the next round, you are 100% going to be dead. And if it's a spell that can intercede in those conditions, then you have to have the spell components. Okay. I know that's a little confusing, but for the most part, I think 90 to 95% of the spells out there, it'll be apparent if that applies or not. And then I told my players that if it's confusing, we'll just, take them on a case by case basis and then be consistent at that point, from that point forward. So, again, a regular cure light wounds, cure serious wounds, whatever, shield, spare the dying, stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the stuff that reverses the fact that either you're dead or you are definitely going to die. Definitely. Like next round. And again, a healing spell wouldn't count, because if you've lost 2 death saving throws and you have another round of it, you don't know for sure if you're going to die next round. Okay, so keep that in mind. So in that case, a healing spell you could just still cast. Now, I don't even know off the top of my head. I don't think most healing spells even require a component, but Spare the Dying doesn't require a component. I'm just using those for illustration purposes of the kind of spells that wouldn't fall under this. So we've modified the house rule that way. And I did say moving forward, so the Revivify they want to do from the other night, I said fine, just spend the 300 gold pieces. And I also said moving forward, since we're instituting this change while they're still running around out in the Wormwrithings, I said until you can get to a merchant or something like that, then the group, not each player, but the group can cast each instance of one of those kinds of spells, like Raise Dead, Revivify, Resurrect, whatever, once, and still just pay the gold piece spell component cost without needing the component. But, once they get back to civilization and everything, they're going to have to buy them if they want them. Now, I did have one player come to me and say, well, we had 2,400 gold pieces or something. And I think that our cleric would have, because she had 2,400 gold pieces wealth. And I think it's fair to say that they would have spent it all on diamonds. And, I went back and kind of my response trying to be fair was that, okay, I think it would be fair to say that if this is the case, they would have spent some of their wealth on diamonds, but I've never heard of any cleric or mage or magic user or whatever spending all of their wealth on just one type of spell component. I've just never heard of that. So I think I just said, you can do like 900 gold pieces worth, because I think at this point all the cleric can cast is Revivify. So that would be 3 Revivifies. And I said, I think that's fair enough, since we're, kind of going back and saying what would have somebody have done. So anyway, so we did that with these spell components. That's a change I made. I wouldn't recommend you going that way if you don't normally use spell components, unless your players are just blazing through everything and just killing everything, and you need to adjust the difficulty level, and give them a little bit more an investment if they're just going to be brushing aside death here and there. So there you go. The other thing I want to talk about is the rope trick spell. Now, rope trick came into play during this purple worm fight, because it became a handy tactic strategy, if you will, for the party members who were not going to engage directly in the fight to just scamper up that rope, get in that interdimensional space or other dimensional space, and be safely outside of the fight. All right, so rope trick, let's just take a look at it really quick. All right. Second level transmutation. Casting time is 1 action. Range is touch. Duration is 1 hour. It's pretty important. And it does have verbal, somatic, and material components. Now, you touch a length of rope that is up to 60 feet long. One end of the rope then rises into the ground until the whole rope hangs perpendicular to the ground. At the upper end of the rope, an invisible entrance opens to an extra-dimensional space that lasts until the spell ends. The extra-dimensional space can be reached by climbing to the top of the rope. The space can hold as many as 8 medium or smaller creatures. The rope can be pulled into the space, making the rope disappear from view outside the space. Attacks and spells can't cross through the entrance into or out of the extra-dimensional space, but those inside it can see out of it as if through a 3 by 5 foot window centered on the rope. Anything inside the extra-dimensional space drops out when the spell ends. So it'll work on a rope up to 60 feet long. If you only have a 20-foot rope or a 10-foot rope or a 5-foot rope, it's only that's as high as it goes before the extra-dimensional space happens. Now, a couple of things to note on this right off the bat are one, the way my players described it was, well, I started the rope when, holding it up off the ground anyway, so it was already like 5 feet off the ground. It went another 50 feet up, so it's 55 or whatever. And I don't know, I can't really tell by the spell description, but I went ahead and said that that's fine. That, because it just says one end of the rope then rises into the air until the whole rope hangs perpendicular to the ground. That's all it says. So it says you touch the rope and it happens. So you could argue that it has to be on the ground and you touch it and then it rises up, or you could say you're holding the rope and you do it and then it rises up from the level you're holding it. I'm not really seeing a ruling either way there. Maybe that's been ruled by Jeremy Crawford or Sage Advice or something. I don't know. But the other thing is, you go into a different dimension, an extra dimensional space. So one of my players was like, well, let's just all get up in here and cast the ritual and get out of here. So, it's in a different dimension. So I kind of ruled that wand of limited Underdark teleportation would not work inside that other dimension, and get them back to Tower of Vengeance. Even if it did, when you teleport back, if you try to teleport back, where would you teleport back to? because you can only teleport from the tower back to where you came from. So you would have to walk by, you would have to march, travel, whatever back if you needed to come back here for any reason. Plus the expedition members aren't up in there with you in the extra dimensional space. The other thing that came up was some of the characters that got up in there wanted to kind of keep, like, on their turn, climb down the rope, cast spells or something, and then climb back up in, or like they had flight casts on them, so they wanted to fly out, do something, and fly back in. And it doesn't specifically say when you get up in there that you can't come back out. So since it didn't specifically say that, I allowed that. But one thing I didn't allow is they just wanted to, because they wanted to be safe from everything, they wanted to stick their hand out and cast a spell. And I was like, well, you can't do that because, unless you can see your target, I don't think that's going to work. And the rope trick was, 40, 50, 60 feet away, not just up, but away from the main fight, so that where it says that 3 foot by 5 foot window centered on the rope, you may not even be able to, see over there. Right. So anyway, those are a few of the things with rope trick that came up. But for the most part, I thought it was a good tactic, and they, before the purple worm even busted in, because, they heard that humming. There's those Area 5 echo chambers that are around the Worm Nursery that once they start humming, and the Fomorian, in last session had ran towards one of them and was yelling to try to set up a vibration and then died. But, he was bellowing loudly enough so the vibration started, and they knew something was up. And then I said, well, now you're hearing, that where the humming started, and they had some different theories as to what the humming was. But then, I said, you're hearing that rumbling that's kind of familiar, they've gotten familiar to at this point, which means an approaching purple worm or purple worm nearby. And so at that point, the wizard said, I'm doing rope trick, or I'm getting rope trick ready. I'm getting the rope out and ready. So, they were preparing for all that. So when he decided to cast rope trick, I had no problem with it. And I let them I think there was a couple of things I said, I don't think that's going to work. Like the ritual inside the rope trick, extra dimensional space, or just sticking your hand out and casting a spell while you're still in it, because you got to see your target or whatever. Anyway, so there was stuff like that I said, I don't think that'll work. But for the most part, I let them go in and out. And I even let people like climb out and hang by one hand and be casting spells or whatever with the other hand and then climbing. So I was fairly lenient with it because I thought it was an interesting tactic. And this, is purple worm and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't have a big problem with it. So that's rope trick. I don't know if it'll come up, in your purple worm fight, but it's one of those kind of spells that players are going to cast and either use cleverly and throw you off and go, oh man, I didn't anticipate that. Or they're going to try to abuse it or misuse it, either purposefully or just, because they don't understand how it works. So I think it's an important spell to know about, like Liamon's tiny hut or any of that stuff, or how does a bag of holding work? How does a portable hole work? All of these things. So anyway, so yeah, this session just turned into a big, huge purple worm fight. And what had happened was, they knew it was, the humming had started and they were like freaking out. And then, so this new session started up and the humming was still going on, and they were all pretty much, we want to get back to the expedition. They were going to go back through the cavern entrance or tunnel or whatever that would take them back to where their expedition was camped out. And then they heard the rumbling and they knew that a purple worm was coming. So, they're like, ah. So what I did, because there was so much discussion at the end of last session, at the beginning of this session, over who was running where, but because where was my miniature? I meant to say my miniature. What I did is there's basically 4 entrances in or out of this main nursery at this point. Now you could have more or less, or more, not less, but more, depending if you've had some other purple worms come through. That there's tunnel 1, tunnel 2 to tunnel 3 that opens up in that sidebar in the purple worm nursery area in the book. That 15 minutes after this, and then 15 minutes after this, and these worm tunnels keep opening up. I only had one. I only had T1 open up, as I explained last video. I didn't have the other two open up. So I had 4 entrances in or out of the main purple worm area. So I numbered them 1 through 4, and I rolled a 4-sided dice, a 4-sider, to determine which direction is this purple worm going to bust in from. And that's what I decided to do, to be fair. And in the book, it may say, the book might say that it comes up through area 7. Let me see. But I just rolled, a D4 and let the dice determine it. It said the adventurer set off a humming in one of these echo chambers. A distant rumbling can be heard and felt as purple worm burrows toward the egg chamber, arriving there in 1d4 minutes. See section 8 for details. So let's see, or details. Let's see where it would come in from. If a purple worm appears, it enters the nursery through the tunnel in area 7 and circles the outside of the cavern. So if you want to do it by the book, that's how it happens. But I just did a D4, and it ended up busting in from I rolled a 1, and that was the number that I had assigned to T1 so the tunnel that connects area 3 to area 8 that they were running for. It just happened to work out randomly by the dice roll. The one that the majority of the characters were running for was where the purple worm came busting in. Now, what I told them was, I said, you got a clue from the drow on what to do if a purple worm shows up, but I didn't tell them again what that clue was. I just said, you got a clue. And the clue was, or it was more than a clue, they were told if a purple worm is around, then go stock still. Get up against the wall or something like that, and just go stock still. And don't make any noise, don't make any sound, don't make any vibration, whatever. And it requires a DC 10 stealth check not to be detected by the worm. So some of the players remembered that, some of them didn't. One player decided to purposefully run towards the worm and make a lot of, not try to hide their footsteps and all that to attract. He was a monk character trying to attract attention. Some of the characters were like, I'm not even going to try to get into this fight. I'm escaping as soon as possible. One of them had the worm egg. That was the whole point for being here. And they were like, I'm staying out of this fight. I'm guarding the egg. The cleric ended up trying to climb the rope, and she failed her check and fell. So she just stayed prone most of the fight, and threw her what I forget what they're called, but it's basically the drow version of the cloak of elvenkind, and was just freezing on the floor prone. And then I had some other characters scamper up into the rope trick, and then I had some other characters, players straight up fight the worm. And then the rogue character was creeping around and ran through T1 back into area 3 and all that to tell the guards in the expedition what was going on and all of that. So had all this fighting going on, and a lot of I'm not fighting, and some, hey, we can't handle this on our own, or we need to make sure that the expedition, one of the player that ran back to the expedition to find Eldith said, hey, if we die, your next goal is to just get back to Gauntlgrim and tell Bruiner everything we've learned. Because, the party at this point was literally thinking, maybe, what if we have a TPK? So, and Eldith was like, when the rogue Grimy, stealthed around and made it into the cavern and made it into the area where the expedition was, found Eldith, and who was the Eldith with a few of the Order of the Gauntlet, which is their bodyguard in this campaign. The Order of the Gauntlet is sworn to be the player's bodyguard. They're like, Eldith was like, Helm's beard, a purple worm, and so Grimy relayed, and Eldith was like, we'll do, if you guys fall, we'll get this information back to Bruenor, because Bruenor needs to know, and he doesn't yet, that, Gromf Bonray or Banray of House Banray, the Archmage of Minzo Bronzin, cast a spell of summoning that Lolth kind of interfered with, that created this whole Demon Lord incursion in the first place. And that they're working with Viseron, the players are working with Viseron to create an artifact, or to create some sort of the Heart of Darkness or a Dark Heart, which is needed for a ritual, which will collect all the Demon Lords together in one place. They'll fight it out, and then whoever's left over should be weak enough that, adventurers and armies and stuff could kill them. And when they die, they get banished and exiled back to the Abyss. And Bruenor needs to know this. So I thought that was pretty interesting that at least one of the players had the presence of mind to say, we got to get this information back to Bruenor if we die, Now, the Order of the Gauntlet, that was with, there was like 3 of the Order of the Gauntlet NPCs that were with Eldith, and said, no, we're not, we're going out there and we're helping you, because that we are sworn to protect you. And they couldn't talk them out of it, so they went charging out and got into the fight with the Purple Worm in the last couple of rounds, and that actually helped the players by diverting some of the attention. In fact, one of the Order of the Gauntlet NPCs fell. 1 hit with the tail, the piercing damage plus the poison, and the Order of the Gauntlet uses veteran stats from the monster manual. It just boom, killed him. And that's the NPC that the party wants to revivify. That's what kicked off the whole revivify and spell components discussion. So another thing that is worth mentioning here is if the players have the Shield Guardian, this was the first combat or whatever where the Shield Guardian really came into play. And the Shield Guardian is sweet. There's a couple of different reasons. One, so make sure to go study up on the Shield Guardian if your party has it and you haven't already studied up on it. One, it's pretty tough in its own right. It's got a lot of hit points and it gets 2 attacks and all that. 2, you can store spells in it. It starts off with a lightning bolt spell stored in it, which was unleashed from the Shield Guardian in this fight. One of the first things that it was ordered to do was to use the lightning bolt on the Purple Worm. And remember, the way I'm doing the Shield Guardian is I haven't let the player get direct control of it. I have the player give commands to the Shield Guardian, and then I have the Shield Guardian act those commands out to the best of what I feel its ability and understanding would be. And it's been pretty fun to do it that way. So it's not just another player, because we already have 8, so that would make 9, and then they have Eldith, and so there you go. Again, overpowered OP. So but it was a good fight. Study up on the worm. It is gargantuan, and one of my players brought a Purple Worm miniature and has actually had it with us the last 2 or 3 sessions because they were that convinced that they were going to run into a Purple Worm, which really they should have been. They were in a purple worm nursery, and in the Wormwrithings, which is there's worms everywhere. But when this thing busted out. It was the first time they'd seen a full-on worm. Now, they'd seen worms going through, cutting parallel through a tunnel, or they'd, go in just under their feet, seen little bits and, humps of a worm or curves but this is the first time they'd seen the full-on worm, and it just busted out on them. And, I said over and over that, you're all of your characters, you've never seen anything like this. You're just overwhelmed by how big and dangerous this thing appears. Gods, what a monster. It's gargantuan. But this miniature, I'll put a picture up. Gargantuan, I think, if I remember right, I have to go back and look, but I think it's 20 foot by 20 foot, so 4 squares by 4 squares. And the miniature base that we were using only had it was occupying 3 squares by 3 squares. So it was an order of magnitude too small. It was like it was a huge, not a gargantuan. So one of my players, very clever, used an index card and folded it up in a certain way to make it the correct. Maybe it was 4 by 3. I can't remember. I'd have to go look it up. But to make it the correct size on the map, and then we put the base on top of that. And I'll put a picture up of that. Just be aware, double check if you're using, because I'm not sure what edition that purple worm miniature came from. So just be aware that, you know, the base size might not be correct because it's gargantuan. It has a bite that does a lot of damage on its own. And if that bite is successful, then the players have to make or whoever was bit has to make I think a dexterity saving throw. And they, if they fail it, they're swallowed by the worm. I think I forgot to keep giving the details on the shield guardian. I'll get back to that here in a second. But yeah, let's look at the worm. Yeah, if they get hit, if they get bit, if the target is larger, smaller, and there's and they get hit with the bite, they also have to make a DC 19 dexterity saving throw, or they're swallowed by the worm. A swallowed creature is blinded and restrained. It has total cover against attacks and other effects outside the worm, and it takes 6d6, or an average of 21, acid damage at the start of each of the worm's turns. If the worm takes 30 damage or more on a single turn from a creature inside it, the worm must succeed on a DC 21 Constitution saving throw at the end of that turn, or regurgitate all swallowed creatures which fall prone in a space within 10 feet of the worm. Now, it doesn't say if they take falling damage, so I guess that's up to you. If the worm dies, the swallowed creature is no longer restrained by it, and it can escape from the corpse by using 20 feet of movement, exiting prone. It also has a tail stinger, and the worm makes 2 attacks, one with its bite and one with its stinger. It's a melee weapon attack. Both of these attacks have a reach of 10 foot, so that's the bite and the tail stinger. And if you hit with the tail stinger, it does 3d6 plus 9 piercing damage, and the target must make a DC 19 Constitution saving throw. And if it fails, it takes 12d6 poison damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. So this thing is CR 15. It's got armor class of 18 from natural armor. It's got 247 hit points. And here's the thing, it's got a speed of 50 feet, and it can burrow 30 feet. So right at the beginning of this fight, and I may put up a picture with some marks to show what happened. The worm, busted in. And this monk purposefully ran a certain distance towards it, purposefully not trying to be stealthy to attract its attention. But he stayed a ways back, not realizing that the purple worm not only had a movement of 50 feet, but has a reach of 10. So effectively, this worm in any one round can get to somebody and attack them within 60 feet, right? So that's 30 squares? No, 5 into 12 squares on a grid map. So it's got a pretty effective movement. It can really move around the map. Also, it can tunnel and burrow at 30 feet per round or per turn, and it does have a tunneler where it says the worm can burrow through solid rock at half its burrow speed and leaves a 10-foot diameter tunnel in its wake. Its saving throws Constitution plus 11, Wisdom plus 4. Blind sight 30 feet, Tremor sense 60 feet, passive perception 9. Again, challenge rating 15. It's gargantuan monstrosity unaligned. So it's pretty tough. Now, what I did was I because no matter how tough something is, if you have 8, plus a shield guardian, which is 9, plus familiars, whatever, all attacking one thing, that can be, they can, a lot of little against one big can really go into the little's favor because you're just hammering on it. And even though it's hitting hard each round, it can only do so much. So I gave it a lot more XP. I gave it like another 150 XP or something like that. You know, one, because I'm wanting to make this more of a challenge. And even then, they overcame it fairly easily. Now, they did have a player that would have died had I not intervened. But there was even some stuff that they could have done that they didn't that would have saved that character. So, you know, take that for what you will. But I was like, well, I'll just buff up the hit points to keep it in the fight, to make this more interesting if they want to stop and fight it. But later I went and, you know, I checked Kobold Fight Club. Again, I'll try to put up a screenshot of that. 8 7th level players, you know, plus the Shield Guardian, which I didn't even factor in, against 1 purple worm is actually only a medium encounter by Kobold Fight Club. And they're like, their math is like the adjusted XP for that should only be 6,500 XP instead of 13,000 or whatever. Now, I'm not going to do that to the players. I'll give them full XP value for the purple worm, but I was thinking about even give them the XP value of CR 16 or 17, but I'm not going to do that. You know, once I see that, you know, 8 7th level players versus a purple worm is only considered a medium challenge. So I'm going to give them the full 13,000, even though I gave it extra hit points. But I gave it extra hit points. One, you know, just say it was a unusually large specimen of a purple worm. But 2, it's kind of like this is mama or daddy protecting its babies, right? So it's going to fight even harder and all that kind of thing. So it just, that's kind of how I, you know, it's protecting its eggs. So that's kind of how I justified that. But anyway, a lot of fighting. During the fight, that monk who was like, oh, I didn't know I could move that much, you know, because it was intentionally trying to attract its attention, did get bit, did get swallowed, and spent several rounds. I think the first round tried to do as much damage as the character's a she, the player's a he, from inside the purple worm, did 28 points, only 2 points shy of activating that regurgitation thing, but didn't. And when they failed on the first round, then they just started drinking healing potions to try to hang in there. And since, you know, D&D rounds are 6 seconds each, you know, this probably ended up being it was a 2-hour fight in our real world time, but, you know, they wouldn't have to worry about suffocating or anything. They were just drinking healing potions. I didn't say anything in the restrained, condition that said they couldn't do potions and stuff like that. So I went ahead and allowed it. You know, even if they've been there for a long time, really there's an interesting discussion and debate out there on, you know, can you drown if you're sitting there drinking healing potions? So there you go. But for the point of this, I didn't mess with it very much. The Shield Guardian also got swallowed at a certain point and was doing pretty good damage on the inside. The ironic thing was, the way I'm interpreting the purple worm is if it says 30 points from a creature in one turn or round or whatever. However, let me see how that's written again. Then, you know, it will regurgitate, takes 30 damage or more on a single turn from a creature inside of it. The worm must succeed on a DC 21 Constitution saving throw. Now, I think the argument can be made that would have to be one creature doing that 30 damage on its turn. But I went ahead and was like, if in that combat round or whatever, you know, the creatures inside did an accumulated 30 points of damage or more, I would have allowed the regurgitation. So if the monk had continued trying to hurt the worm while the Shield Guardian was also pummeling on the worm from the inside, then I would have allowed that regurgitation. And I think, in fact, in one round, there was a chance of a regurgitation, because I think the Shield Guardian critted or something, and the worm made its saving throw, so it did not regurgitate. There you go. What are you going to do? So anyway, and the reason that the Shield Guardian was pummeling the worm from the inside, because the last order it had been given was, you know, attack this worm with everything you got. So, but it's a telepathic connection with the shield guardian. So I'm sure that the guy could have said once, even after it got swallowed, could have said, fight your way out or kill that worm from the inside or whatever. So it was just a big fight, a big fun fight, with, some characters doing nothing, some characters hiding, some characters cowering, some characters being in the rope trick dimensional space and popping in and out, some characters being swallowed, some characters running off to the expedition and warning them and trying to get help and stuff like that. So, and then the last couple of rounds, those 3 Order of the Gauntlet people came out and one of them got killed. And then a couple other rounds, cause I'm just randomly rolling who's the worm attacking. And, those Order of the Gauntlet took up 2 or 3 rounds worth of the worm's attack. So it did help to have them out there. And then they finally defeated the worm. Now, the player died, straight up died by failing death saving throws and all of that. So just, that happened. And I'll explain how I handled that. I hope I planted a seed for a future cool scene in the campaign that also fits in with something that the campaign suggests that you can do optionally. And I'll get to that here in a second. But I wanted to revisit the Shield Guardian. If you're going to use the Shield Guardian, be aware that if you're within 60 feet or something like that, the Shield Guardian will take half the damage that the player takes. It's, you're wearing this control amulet thing. So magically, it will absorb half of the damage that the player takes. On top of that, if it's next to that player in combat, that player gets a +2 AC bonus to reflect the fact that the Shield Guardian is basically being a bodyguard and, defending its master. And then also remember that the Shield Guardian you can cast spells into it to later be cast out. So be aware of that. And, I'm basically having the spells cast out at the level they were cast in. The book Out of the Abyss says that when they receive the Shield Guardian, when you win that chess match in Gauntlgrim or whatever, that it already has a lightning bolt stored inside of it. It doesn't say what level the lightning bolt was or what difficulty class you have to overcome, for saving throws and that sort of thing. So I just said, well, it was a basic lightning bolt, a 3rd, 4th level spell, whatever. It was the basic lightning bolt. It wasn't cast at additional levels, but I did have it use that NPC's, because he's an archmage. It was an archmage difficulty class for, trying to take half damage or whatever. So that's how I handled that. But anyway, they did finally defeat the worm, and then they got the heck out of Dodge with that egg, and that's where we ended. They're like, the worm's dead, and they're getting the heck out of there. The player died, and what I did was I decided to have a cool moment, because now this is the same player that has done other stuff that people are like, what, like that charged, an adult red dragon at, at 2nd level paladin, has done it was the one that was like, Demogorgon sends his regards and like flamed Zugtmoy to try to start a Demon Lord gang war and all this, and just some just crazy stuff, and died. But in this case, the player, had run the monk up and was trying to be strategically smart to attract attention, because like, hey, I'm a monk, I've got high dex, I'll stay a ways back, I'll bring the worm over to me, and then, I can disengage and get out of here, and it'll take the heat off everybody else. And they just didn't realize, the 60 feet in one round move and attack range that this worm has. So, but because of all that, plus it's kind of a cool moment, I decided to have a divine intervention on this player. Now, and this fits because Out of the Abyss, and this has come up once or twice before, I had somebody actually bring it to my attention in the comments, so I appreciate that. There's several videos back. But on page 217, there's a sidebar in there called Jim Jar's Last Gamble. And Jim Jar was the Deep Gnome NPC that was, from the very beginning, that was one of the slaves that they escape with. You can have Jim Jar either be a deity or the agent of a deity and reveal that later in the campaign, and Jim Jar can intervene at a certain point and grant help to the players. And then, get revealed as, this is I was more than I appeared to be, because they have an interest in protecting the Underdark or whatever. So, and I did in the battle for, was it Blending Stone? I think it was the battle for Blending Stone. Jim Jar did show up and did an impassioned speech, for the players, and swayed things to, let the players lead the fight against the Pudding King and all that. But that could just be, it was just interesting that Jim Jar was there. But now, it's like, well, maybe Jim Jar was there just kind of tipping the scales a little bit for them, but not doing everything for them. So I'm going to have Jim Jar reveal at a certain point before the campaign. And I think it'll just fit in well, because I told the player, I said, you're dead. You're dead. You're straight up dead. But you hear this voice that's kind of playful and friendly, and said, hey, you gambled to save your comrades and to accomplish the mission. And I respect that. And you got to remember, Jim Jar's a gambler. So that's a little hint to the characters, if they're really thinking about it, to the players. And he said, I respect that. I said, I won't do this for you again, but the dice roll the way the dice roll. And I appreciate, I respect what you did. So I'm going to help you out in this case. And basically did, a healing, brought the character back to life at 1 hit point, and all of their possessions, armor, whatever, I think they were monks, they weren't wearing straight up armor, but all their possessions were fine, and their skin wasn't all, their arm wasn't dissolved off. They were normal, but they only had 1 hit point. And I said, you don't know exactly what happened, but it was some sort of, basically a divine experience. And so that was cool. Okay, that was pretty neat. And then, because I had told the players later, I said, if that divine intervention hadn't happened and you had tried to cast Revivify on the player or the character, it would have been ugly, because nose is gone, ears are gone, hand is dissolved off, leg is separated from, the body because of all this acid. And, and Revivify does not restore lost limbs and all that stuff. So there you go. And so the Shield Guardian climbed out and all that stuff. So, anyway, so that's it. But yeah, it was a big, huge purple worm fight. Let me look over my notes, see if there's anything else I want to mention. Let's see. Yes. Vicious Mockery. My bard used Vicious Mockery on the worm and told the worm that it had peoples. Said, man, that's disgusting. You've got peoples. So instead of, someone said, oh, you got worms, like, you got peoples. That was pretty funny. Oh yeah, we had a moment where one player had disadvantage on an attack and rolled 2 20s. So not only did they overcome disadvantage, but they got a critical hit. And, one of my players pointed out that's a 1 in 400 chance. So that was pretty cool. That was a nice moment. Anyway, but that's it for this session. Thanks so much for watching. If you could, please leave this video a thumbs up and a comment on YouTube. That helps me out a whole lot. Tell people about the channel. That helps me out a lot too. But regardless, I appreciate you watching, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.